away.
Everyone knows that lions enjoy eating meat, and once upon a time, lions in captivity used to be given great joints of horse meat so they could chew the long bones and absorb the calcium they needed to build up their own bones. The trouble was that they didn't build up their own bones. They got so thin you could actually see through them on an X-ray. And then it was discovered that lions can't gnaw long bones. Their jaws just aren't strong enough. Indeed, in the wild, they eat the soft flesh of the animal and then just chew into the rib cage, where the ribs are small and crunchy. These days, lions in captivity are fed meat that contains small, crunchy bones, and they're also given supplements to cover other deficiencies in their diet. It's an interesting example of how easy it is to make mistakes with diet. In their own environment, of course, lions wouldn't have made the mistake. They would have known by instinct what was good for them, an instinct which was developed as part of their evolutionary history. Looking at other animals in the zoo, we're reminded how each species has evolved to eat a particular type of diet. Penguins wouldn't eat the meat that's fed to lions, and giraffes will find their nourishment only from leaves and other vegetation the food evolution has designed them to eat. But what are the human animals eating at the zoo? Unlike the animals in the cages, no keeper is going to tell them what they should eat. Human animals are heavily influenced in their diet by culture as well as instinct, which is why humans in other parts of the world with very different cultures eat very different food. Human beings are omnivores, which means our bodies can digest almost any kind of food as long as it isn't poisonous. So does it matter what we eat? Earlier this century, nutritionists in Britain were mainly worried that people weren't getting enough nourishment. On a world scale, starvation is still a major problem, but in the affluent West, with our mountains of grain, there should not, in theory, be any problem about the adequacy of our diet. Yet, for the last 20 years, evidence has been building up that the Western diet is the underlying cause of the diseases which have built up with affluence. It's claimed that coronary heart disease only occurs in populations with a particular style of diet, that many cancers, adult diabetes, gallstones, and problems with the digestive system are linked to Western food habits. At this point, I must come clean. I'm not investigating these claims because I'm suspicious of them. As a scientist, I know that all proof is provisional, but the evidence is pretty formidable. I think what's difficult for the average eater to understand, somebody who hasn't followed the twists and turns of the scientific debate, is that the British diet can be the source of the major epidemics in the developed world. After all, we have stringent hygiene regulations, and most people consider they eat good, wholesome food. But this debate isn't about natural food versus processed food, or about fast food versus home cooking. It's about the relative proportion of foods in our diet, and it's about overnutrition, and that doesn't just mean eating too much. I began this program in the zoo because it shows the diversity of animal life and animal diet. Each one evolved to fit its particular environment and to exploit particular foods. But you may say, how does this relate to humans who are masters of adapting to a huge range of environments? The crucial point is that humans are still animals. It took millions of years for our species, Homo sapiens, to evolve. Because of our intelligence, we're able to create our own environments. But what we cannot do is change the basic biology of the human body. So what is man designed to eat? The Olduvai Gorge in East Africa has revealed so many footprints and other fossils of early man that this area of Tanzania is known as the cradle of mankind. Painstaking analysis of jaws and teeth have shown that early man evolved from an eating pattern similar to chimpanzees, that is, mainly fruit, to a more omnivorous diet of wild animals and plants. To find present-day evidence about what our bodies were designed to eat, we can do no better than look at the food of people who live off raw nature. The Hadza are a small tribe living in a remote part of Tanzania. Unlike most Africans today, they are hunter-gatherers. They neither grow crops nor keep animals. All their food comes from the free-living nature around them. The anthropologist James Woodburn recorded the Hadza tribe on film in 1961. He believes that examining the food of the Hadza can give us clues about the food of our ancient ancestors.
If we take the total period of man's existence at around 2 million years, the exact length of time is controversial, but let's say around 2 million years, agriculture and the keeping of domesticated animals have only been practiced for some 10,000 or so years. And so hunting and gathering represents some 99% of all human history. And during that vast period of human history, people living solely by hunting and gathering developed into what is essentially the current form of humanity. We were, by the end of the hunting and gathering period, essentially modern man, physically and mentally, with characteristics as they are today.
The Hadza obtain their food in many different ways. They're eating a wide range of wild berries and fruits. They're eating many different species of roots. They're eating the meat of many species of wild animals and birds. And they're collecting the honey of not just one species of wild bee, but in the case of the Hadza, actually of 7 different species of bee.
Like most humans, the Hadza love sweetness. They go to great lengths to get at honeycombs lodged in trees and rocks. Honey is the only natural source of refined sugar found in nature. Most nutrition experts now recommend that we should eat less refined sugar, but the Hadza only eat honey as a special treat when they can get it. So their sugar consumption, unlike ours, is only a very small part of their calorie intake.
Now, honey and meat are the preferred foods. The problem with both honey and meat is their unpredictability. You can't count on getting a regular supply of honey and meat. And the reason why vegetable food constitutes the bulk of the diet is that you can rely on getting it on a daily basis.
The other component of the Hadza diet is meat, but they are restricted in their consumption by what they can catch. Their success rate is about 1 in 10. When they do succeed, they enjoy eating the fat, and it's been suggested that just as humans have a natural desire for sugar, they have an inbuilt desire for fat. But unlike us in the West, the Hadza's supply of both sugar and fat is restricted by nature. They enjoy eating what they get, but the amounts are minute compared with the amounts modern technology in the West enables us to consume. The Hadza diet is determined by a natural environment, which they haven't sought to change. But most of us are now living in and eating from an environment radically altered by Western culture. Professor Michael Crawford is at the Nuffield Institute of Zoology at London Zoo.
Now, if you look at the countries throughout the world today, what you're actually seeing is the end product of a human evolutionary process. And that has happened very dramatically in the last few centuries. It has taken place with such speed that there really just hasn't been time for man to adapt biologically to the change which has occurred. We're only 150 generations down from the end of the Mesolithic period, and there's no way that we could biologically have adapted to the dramatic changes in food structure that have occurred over the last, say, 200 or 300 years alone. Never mind the whole business of getting involved in agriculture, for starters. So it seems to me that the only way in which you can get a message about what sort of food man was adapted to throughout his evolutionary history is to go back to square one, go back to wildlife. And if you look at wildlife, if you look at wild animals and plants, the sort of things that people like the Hadza, for example, are eating still today, you are looking at the same chemistry that man ate throughout his evolution. And that gives you a clear-cut, quantifiable message. When people say, well, you know, the amount of fats that we've eaten in the last 50 years really hasn't changed significantly. They can't really substantiate that because we don't have the foods to analyze. We can't do anything quantitative about that. We know there have been substantial changes in animal husbandry, animal feeding techniques, and the advances in terms of broiler feeding of chickens, of factory farming, and so on, have made substantial and significant changes to the composition of the animals that we're eating. So the only way you can really get anywhere is to look for some kind of scientific measure, and that, I think, it has to be what wildlife offers.
We can be fairly sure that our distant ancestors lived off nature, just as the Hadza and other hunter-gatherer tribes like the Bushmen of the Kalahari do today. We can't be sure what proportions of meat and vegetation our ancestors ate, but we do know that their meat, wild meat, was very different from what we now buy at the butchers.
If you go and look at wild animals, wildlife, you find that it's not a high-fat product. It's in fact a low-fat product. But the fats that are present are extremely interesting because you're looking at fats which are not involved in sort of adipose tissue, the sort of stuff that you have around your waistline and most people try to get rid of. It's not that kind of fat. It's the fat which we call structural fat, which is used to build every single cell in the body. And it's as significant to us nutritionally as protein. And we call it structural fat, and it's built with essential fatty acids. Now, of course, when you eat a wild animal, and when primitive man was living under those conditions in which wild animals made a significant contribution to his food, he was eating a food which was low in total fat, low in saturated fat, but rich in those essential, highly unsaturated fats which you need for particularly the sophisticated aspects of biology, but basically for building every single cell in the body. If you look at the contemporary nature of animal products which people are eating today, they are eating what effectively is a high-fat product, which is predominantly saturated fat. And of course, the same applies to vegetation as well. I mean, the Hadza make significant use of tubers, which they dig out of the ground, and they collect berries and nuts and things from trees and bushes. Now, if you look at the chemistry again of those products, the tubers are very rich in fiber, whereas the seeds and nuts that they're eating may have quite a lot of fat in them. Some of them do, because we've measured it. But the fat, again, is highly unsaturated. It's essential fatty acids that they're eating.
The Hadza diet may not look like a rival to Western cuisine, but it's clearly a healthy diet. Dr. Woodburn again.
The clinical nutritional status of the Hadza has been carefully examined by a team of pediatricians, and I remember the surprise of the pediatricians at not finding a single case of clear malnutrition among the hundreds of adults and children that were examined.
In particular, we do know that the Hadza are one of those very few populations in the world where blood pressure scarcely rises with age. We also know that serum cholesterol levels are very low indeed. And again, that's unusual.
Serum cholesterol is the fat in the blood which we now know to be linked to the onset of coronary heart disease in the West. This type of cholesterol is far lower in all native Africans, not just the Hadza. Today, most Africans live by agriculture, and away from the drought areas of North Africa, the people are able to grow enough food for themselves and to produce a surplus to sell in the markets. I went to the village of Ilula in the heart of Tanzania to look at the diet. My guide was Dr. Mallet Lema, who's in charge of Tanzania's Food and Nutrition Center. What must impress any visitor from the world of supermarkets is the way the people live with their food around them. The village is surrounded by cultivated plots, but most people also have extensive gardens around their immediate homes.
Very commonly eaten is the beans, which are grown all over. And right here we also have a vegetable, the pumpkin leaves. These are eaten quite commonly.
What, the leaves?
The leaves are eaten quite commonly.
I asked Dr. Mallet Lema, what is the basic food of the village?
Well, it's mainly based on cereals like maize, rice, and sometimes they have a little wheat also. But they also eat potatoes, especially sweet potatoes and round potatoes as well.
Do you regard that as a healthy diet?
Yes, indeed. When combined with the available beef and pork, which they have in the village, yes, it's a very healthy diet.
How much fat do they have in their diet here?
The wealthy group can afford the fat.
In a village like this?
Yes, even in a village. In fact, they have oil made out of sunflower. They make their own oil. Then you have the beef. They can have the fat from that, and the pork. But then when you come to children, you find they are not given much of this food. And so you have a problem on the children's side, and the poor members of the community, who are quite a large proportion, who don't have these, cannot afford these, because they are usually expensive. So the fat in the general content of fat is low. I would say again, on the average, maybe below 10%.
This compares with an average of 40% of all types of fat in our diet. The meat on these cattle will contain more saturated fat than the meat from the wild animals that the hunter-gatherers ate, but still much less than the intensively reared cattle we eat in the West. While we grow maize to fatten up our cattle, in the African village, maize is grown for the people. Although a small amount of it is eaten as corn on the cob, the bulk of it is turned into flour by each family. And just as all humans appear to have a natural appetite for sugar and fat, it would seem all humans also want to refine their food.
Well, the main thing is to remove the outer husk and part of the attachment to the cob.
In fact, getting rid of the fibre, is it?
Yes, that is mainly the outer fiber, certainly. But there is still a lot of fiber left within the texture of the maize.
And that's what makes the refined food of the African village very different from ours. For in the West, mechanized mills are able to remove all the fiber from the grain, and with it, much of the goodness. The low-fat, high-fiber qualities of the African diet are exactly what Western nutritionists are now recommending us to eat. The advantage of this sort of food is that you have to eat a substantial meal to take in enough calories. This maize porridge, ugali, is typical. It's largely made up of complex carbohydrates, starch which fills you up, and so even Africans who eat well all their lives don't become fat. Of course, third world countries have a higher and more dangerous level of infectious diseases, but Africans who escape these don't suffer from the chronic diseases that plague the West. It is this fact which has stimulated interest in the African diet. One man who has first-hand experience of the difference in disease patterns between Africa and Britain is Dr. Dennis Burkitt.
When I came back to Britain after 20 years of surgery in Africa, I began to do ward rounds in hospitals in England and America. And it struck me that most of the beds were filled with patients suffering from diseases which are rare or unknown in the third world. Now, I'm not talking about rare diseases. I'm talking about coronary heart disease, the commonest cause of death in the West. Large bowel cancer, the second commonest cancer death after lung cancer. Appendicitis, the commonest abdominal emergency. Gallstones, the commonest abdominal operation. Obesity, the commonest nutritional disorder. Diabetes, the commonest endocrine disorder. Varicose veins and hemorrhoids, the commonest venous disorders, and so one could go on. So it's an enormous amount of our disease load must be preventable. We've plunged into a dietetic environment to which we are not adapted. As my friend Ken Heaton of Bristol said it so aptly, we are putting machine-age food into Stone-Age bodies. Our bodies are the same as they were thousands of years ago, but our food's changed.
Our cultural heritage in food these days seems to be wide and varied, as the choice in our supermarkets seems wide and varied. But in reality, Western food is based around far fewer raw materials than the food of hunter-gatherers in Africa. There they eat up to 100 different kinds of vegetables and fruits. We eat an average of 10. As agriculture and food technology has become more and more sophisticated, our food has become over-dependent on animal fats. In Dar es Salaam, the capital of Tanzania, city dwellers have a different food legacy. I went with a food scientist to a local restaurant used by the traders and workers at Dar es Salaam's biggest market. Mrs. Kasanga ordered 2 lots of food, and quite honestly, it didn't look all that appetizing. Now I see this is a big plate of rice, but what have you got there?
Oh, here I have got ugali. It's our major staple food. Our meals here are very different from yours, in that ours are basically starch. We have got a big bowl of starch here and a small dish of meat. But in Europe or in England, you will get a big slice of meat, a very little amount of potatoes, and maybe some vegetable. But of the actual concept of a meal, I think even in concept, ours is really different from yours in that we consider the starchy part our major food and the most important part of the meal.
Why do you think your diet is so different from ours?
Well, I think our diet is different from yours because we have mostly kept to the traditional customs.
So present-day African eating depends largely on starchy foods. Although more affluent people in Africa are moving towards a Western style of eating, the majority eat food based on the traditional village diet, and that means it's low in saturated fat, high in fibre, low in sugar and salt. Expert committees have said we should eat less saturated fat, more fibre, and reduce our consumption of refined sugar and salt. The reports are based on medical, not biological evidence, on the links between food and disease. Critics say the evidence is incomplete, and that's true. But whatever new knowledge comes to light, we can certainly say that the recent recommendations make biological sense, and they don't contradict what we know about human evolution. There are sections of the food industry in Britain, and even members of my own profession, who would have us believe that these food objectives are unobtainable in Western countries because the resulting food would be too unappetizing for sophisticated palates. They pour scorn on the recommendations by asking if we must all live on a constant diet of maize porridge.
Well, I'm delighted to say that the answer is no, because the diet that's being recommended, that is high on fibre and low in fat, is the basis of some of the great cuisines in the world. How about the one that springs out of our own cultural tradition, a diet that could have been written by a modern nutritional scientist, the great Mediterranean diet? Good evening. I'm looking forward to this meal. Here at this mock banquet in southern Italy, the food legacy inherited by rural Italy from the ancient Greeks who built this temple lives on. It's a legacy which has helped to keep southern Italians free from many of the Western diseases which now plague us. Alla salute. I invited 3 professors to be among my guests at this traditional Mediterranean feast. Professor Marty Karvonen retired here after working in Finland, where he helped to improve the national diet and consequently its health. Professor Anna Ferraluzzi works at the Italian Institute of Nutrition and, like her colleagues at the table, believes the typical Mediterranean diet being served is one of the healthiest cuisines in the world. Perhaps the most famous of my guests is Professor Ansel Keys, now living in this part of rural Italy, but still professor of medicine at the University of Minnesota. He carried out a study in 7 countries of 12,000 people to find evidence for the links between food and health. I asked Ansel Keys how he came to favor Mediterranean food like this.
The taste, the flavor, I enjoyed it, I liked it. And later on I discovered also it has many virtues in regard to health and matters of that sort. So the two together make a very strong appeal.
What are the virtues in regard to health?
Well, in regard to health, I suppose the thing that impresses me is that as we look at these populations we've been studying, they do, at least in older ages, they do extremely well. And I quite understand the early ideas about the great longevity of the people of this part of the world. Now, it also appears that there is some reason for it, and some of it, at least, is in the diet.
The food we were all served, starting with seafood salad, had all the qualities that the reports we have quoted have been recommending. And of course, it also had the full approval of my guests. Next on the menu was a pancake dish made from pasta flour. Filling, but not fattening. For the main course, we had chicken, which, like all poultry, is lower in saturated fat than other meats, especially without the skin. With it, we were served red peppers and courgettes, more fibre, vitamins and minerals, and a healthy green salad. With my distinguished dinner guests, I'm going to explore the other evidence which links food with health. But for now, let me leave you with 2 thoughts. There is no doubt that the changes now being suggested accord with sound scientific principles. And as I finish off my strawberries and frascati, there is no reason for despair. For the good news from the Temple of Neptune is that good health tastes pretty good too. Salute.
The BBC Food and Health Campaign has produced a free information pack, and to order a copy, please send a large self-addressed envelope stamped with 24p postage to Healthy Eating, BBC Television, London W12 8QT. Due to the heavy demand for these packs, there may be a delay in receiving your copy. The Food and Health Campaign continues on Thursday at 7:35 on BBC Two with the start of a new 8-part series, The Taste of Health, in which Judith Han meets top restaurateurs, famous food writers and cookery experts who demonstrate attractive and tasty meals that